All right. Hey, what's going on, Vet Pivot Nation? Welcome back for another great episode of the Vet Pivot Podcast. And I have a very special guest today. My guest is Air Force Reservist and congressional candidate for Minnesota's 2nd District, Erika Cashin, who's going to be giving us a little bit of wisdom, talking about vet topics and everything vet related, also telling us cool stories about her career and what it's like to go from leader in the military to leader in the country, which is even cooler. So there you go.
Not the military, need some info is where you can get it. You can get it. Vet Pivot. It's the podcast that you need if you gotta stay driven.
Listen, if you haven't to map, there's no need for the panic attack, but you gotta step away from the camera with cat peek a light in the load that you have on your back. Listen, if you haven't to map, there's no need for the panic attack, but you gotta step away from the camera with cat peek a light in the load that you have on your back.
As a matter of fact, what's a plan that you have? You can sit in the back. You can map your path out of this world with the pod that you cast. VETPIVOT reboot. All of my broskies we knew. Holding a cold piece. Warlock with a stick. Spell it out slowly. All of my homies. Hope you listen up closely. Host be putting in noti. Giving info and posting. Pertinent postings for the veteran show is excellent. So you exhibit when you exiting. And you exiting on your transition. And you position for your best vision. This is Vet Pivot.
Erika, how are you?
I am doing very well, thank you.
It's fantastic. It's
Yes.
we ran into some technical difficulties, so it's cool just to make sure that the guests know we worked really, really hard to make this interview happen. So I'm going to throw a T-ball question out there,
Go for it.
That is, have you stocked up on toilet paper?
No, but we ordered it online for the first time.
There you go. It always baffles me, and I crack up. I saw a picture on the internet earlier today, and it was from Ryan Weaver, who's also a vet, but now turned country music artist and also Vet Pivot alumni. He put up if you have if you need 144 rolls of toilet paper over 14 days, then you may need to see your doctor for something other than COVID-19, which I found very funny. So
I saw something just about as funny, which was a comment that if you have that much toilet paper, please also get some contraceptives because we don't want you reproducing.
That's the best part about the internet, is that it has no boundaries. It will make fun of
Right.
just about anything and anyone. And so far, I haven't seen anything that's off limits. But tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about Erika. Your where you're from, why you joined the military, and then we'll kind of pick it up from there.
Goodness. So I am originally from Duluth, Minnesota. I graduated from UMD, University of Minnesota Duluth. When I graduated, I got married. My husband at that time was in the Navy. He was a deep sea diver. So we went to a few different states through his service, Guantanamo Bay for a couple of years, as a matter of fact.
Nice.
He decided he was getting out, and I was, basically entry-level Navy employee, and, I liked the culture. And I thought, what the heck? Why not try it? So I went into the naval the naval office there, the Air Force Service Center, and then I ended up just kind of joining on a whim, and that was 24 years later. So here I am.
Yeah. So long career on a whim. That's pretty cool.
Pretty much. Yes.
So Duluth, Minnesota, same place as like Duluth Trading Company, the guys that make the funny underwear commercials?
It would be, yes, correct.
That's cool. That's very cool.
It's the frozen north. They have a good theme there because you have to like layer clothing and that kind of thing.
So it gets pretty cold there then. I'm not a north guy. Like I grew up in Pittsburgh, and it gets cold enough in Pittsburgh and we see plenty of snow. But I can't imagine, like, my grandfather is from Ontario, and just the winters up north near that, U.S. Canadian border, I can't even imagine what that's like. So it's got to be pretty cool. What's the coolest thing you've done in the wintertime in Duluth?
The coolest thing in Duluth.
Yep.
I think I would say probably the hardest thing was learning how to drive a stick shift on the hill with of course, ice and bad road conditions. So
the kids don't know anything about that these days. They
right,
have no clue.
Right,
They have it way too easy. That's adversity, and triumph over adversity like that makes you a better person. Cool. So you went in, you did 24 years later, and you're still doing the Air Force thing. Aim high.
I am. Yes, absolutely. I was, I did 6.5 active. The bulk of the rest was technician, air reserve technician. So, full-time reserve position, really.
Sure.
Primary career field was force support. So force support officer, that's all of the people programs, human resources, training, administration, lodging, food service, fitness, mortuary affairs.
There's so much that goes into force support. It's like anything that doesn't, it almost feels like anything that doesn't have a home gets put on force support. It's kind of how I feel sometimes, like, okay, we'll just give the force support. So I always, huge shout out to the force support airmen out there in the Air Force that are doing all the jobs, jobs, so that the mission can continue, which is great. So long career, any deployments?
No deployments, but as a human resources officer, we made sure making sure everybody was ready to go, tracked them. Yeah, you had your reflective belts on your way out.
That's right.
Tracked you while you were deployed. Because that's a big hit if you don't have your reflector belt when you deploy.
It is, yeah.
Tracked you when you were there, and then did the redeployment when you come back. So it's a lot about the troop movements and making sure that we know where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And that's a lot of people don't understand the moving parts behind the scenes for a deployment,
right?
And what force support does, and also force support's there if something, heaven forbid, should go wrong during a deployment. They're there to take care of your family as well, and kind of guide them through that tough time.
Right, and I think the one big unsung, function or deployment under force support, and where I have visited, is the mortuary. So they would deploy, but they deploy CONUS, so they go to Dover, Delaware, That's
right.
So it's an interesting, like the shades of service or the shades of a deployment where, you could be in, flying a UAV in the desert of, New Mexico, or Arizona or wherever it is, but you're not deployed, but you have some serious, impact on the effort, or you could be in air conditioning and, in like in Kuwait or something, right? So it's just how interesting how that spectrum works. But again, so our people a lot of them would deploy and go to the mortuary, which is really definitely the impact of war.
Yes, 100%, and that's tough, obviously, but Air Force Airman Family Readiness Centers, they fall under force support, correct?
They do,
so.
Yes.
When we're talking about transition, and for those that don't have Air Force experience, I'm not sure what the other branches call it, but we have Airmen Family Readiness Centers. There's definitely something similar across all the branches of the military. And they coordinate things like the Transition Assistance Program to make sure that those classes take place, because they are congressionally mandated. You do have to take that course. And they facilitate those, house it. They make sure it's coordinated on a routine schedule, so there's plenty of courses for the populace of the base. And they bring in the guest speakers and everything, as well as coordinate with the entities that will come in. I believe it's contracted by region, if I'm not mistaken. But the TAP program, at least where I went through, was taught by a contractor who worked for a private company who had a contract with the base to do TAP. But it's you may know more about that than I do.
Yeah. Well, in the active duty bases, they generally do that. So we have it's the largest military installation in the state, but ours is reserve. So we would contract that out. The nature of reservists doing it, if you have employment, you wouldn't necessarily have to go through that 4-day part of TAP, for the employment services when you're leaving active duty. because you're going to go back to a job or school. It's really for the reservists that are deploying or redeploying. It's really more about your veteran benefits, the VA benefits of medical and, the home loan and education benefits, that kind of thing.
Right. Which is important. And I think that those days, I will tell you from my personal experience with the VA side of it, through TAP, just the TAP part. I think my VA experience outside of that was very pleasant, but I know that others have differing opinions. The VA coursework for TAP was limited in its effectiveness, I think. Is one of the things that I think needs to be addressed is how the Department of Veteran Affairs not only gives transparent and well-executed feedback on how their programs work and what a service member can expect from the VA and how that process goes. But they should also be there to answer questions. When we asked questions in the course, and there were loads of questions in my class to the VA rep, it was a lot of dancing around like, well, I can't answer that. It's going to depend on the individual case. It's going to be and I get that some of that's true, but I think what we're looking for in that course is, okay, well, vector us somehow, let us know a little bit so that we know you take in so much information in TAP and it becomes so difficult to know where to start. And that in and of itself has become what Vet Pivot kind of helps with. I'm not answering VA questions per se because I'm not the expert, but I do know plenty of people that are VA experts and do that for a living where they help servicemen and women deal with their VA questions. So it's tough. I think if you were elected to the 2nd Congressional District of Minnesota, let's say when. I like that better.
Yes, let's do that. I like that.
Okay, good. So when you're elected to the 2nd Congressional District of Minnesota and you have an ability to make an impact on things like this, what sort of veteran issues are at the forefront of your agenda for what you want to get done?
Well, that's a really good question. So what I would say is I know that, so I worked on a transition program specifically for women vets as, they were departing the service.
Yes.
And
cool.
that right now is in legislation. It's in the Deborah Sampson Act. So it's in Title I of the Deborah Sampson Act. You were talking about going through the transition assistance program yourself. I went through, when I left active duty. And what we find similar to my experience was a lot of and I don't want to be overly, say identity, but, as a mother going through, I was worried about pediatrician and about daycare and about, so many of these other things. The person who's leaving the service is also going to be, wondering where am I going to, lay my hat, that kind of thing. So sometimes the timing of it does not make it easy for us to concentrate on what is being presented. Specifically the course that I worked on, I mean, we started it in the Air Force, a small team of us, tried to get the DOD on board to own it, and that didn't work out very well. And, just a variety of reasons, because the DOD really looks at what your primary mission is, the war effort, not post-service. So we ended up partnering with the VA, 2 of us in the Air Force and 2 women at the VA, and they used suicide prevention funds. And we drafted the whole course. It's a 1-day course specifically for women on what the benefits are at the VA. So they understand there's preventive things and there's, a lot of things to draw them to participate at the VHA, the Health Administration. So I think for any person in transition, male or female, it just helps to understand what the details of that are. It's not about, say a crisis or anything like that. There's a lot of preventive things that they're doing, and the VHA is really getting better and better about providing that service, but you really need to know what it is so that you enroll at the VA directly after service. That's the most important piece, is because they're finding that, like, even the suicide instances is all about the sense of isolation. So we're trying to prevent the isolation piece, because that's when you get into all the negative trends, no matter who you are.
Yeah, I think that's very solid. It's very interesting to me, the program piece of it. So you talk about program, you talk about the DoD, obviously what they're focused on. So it's very important that we target the conversation towards the VA. They're the ones that are there to help post-service. That's what they were formed to serve. Is that demographic? So with the programs that they have in place and the increase in spending for things like suicide prevention and awareness, I think that there's an increased awareness already about the fact that there's a suicide problem with veterans. I've even seen proposed legislation, or maybe it's been passed in the House but needs to go to the Senate. I can't remember, but they're talking about the service dogs for vets and how that would be compensatory from the VA. Do you know anything about that per se, or what's going on in that area?
That specifically, I do not.
Okay.
With the service dogs, I do know it takes, some definite time and effort to get them trained. It's not a quick thing. So I know it takes some planning in advance. It's not an easy resource. And you're talking about people that, maybe northern Minnesota, Duluth trading area, right? How do you get a dog that might be trained in Texas up to, to somebody in northern Minnesota? And I think that's, at large, one of the other issues is that we're seeing is we've got one big VA hospital here in Minnesota, and to get care, if you have any difficulty in traveling, it's hard for someone in outstate or, outside of our Twin Cities area to get to the VA hospital. I think that right now technology is doing much better with some of that telehealth stuff. So I think that's, one of the next things to be connected. But as far as the getting like service dogs, I've not heard much about that myself. So.
Well, let's pivot through that a little bit and just rather than just the specificity of the service dogs, maybe talk more about alternative therapies or complementary therapies to things like PTSD and traumatic brain injury. There are a lot of veterans that suffer from that stuff right now, injury related to service that they've performed overseas, combat injuries. It's not uncommon. And it is related to a lot of the issues that are going on with the isolation, because that is a symptom of these mental health conditions. So is there room in the VA to be able to look at, we have this budget, we want to increase our budget for suicide awareness and prevention. Let's take some of that money rather than making the programs that already exist that are maybe not as successful and creating or siphoning off some of that funding to explore other means, other ways of treating and preventing suicide. Is that something that is feasible, plausible? It can happen in the next 2-3 years, 5-10 years?
I would think so, but here's the issue. I think the biggest challenge that we see a lot of veterans have getting any kind of service, no matter what it is, with the VA is making sure that it's documented, that it's service connected.
Right.
So we need to have better attention and better information provided to those that are in transition before you depart the service. Make sure these things are documented in your service record.
Yeah, so absolutely.
I know for example, what we're doing in the Air Force, and I haven't heard a lot about this status recently, but they were building a team that was looking at some of the discharges for cause, right? Like an admin discharge, and seeing if any of those behavior related discharges might have been related to a TBI. So is some of these behaviors that you might be seeing with people that are being discharged, is that potentially caused by a TBI?
That makes sense to me, right? Because you may see something like, at the very least, an upgrade in the discharge, right? Rather than something that could be general or dishonorable, it may be an upgrade to an administrative discharge with, for medical purposes, which then opens the door for them to get more. Yeah, exactly.
The under other than honorable, but really the point is to make sure that things are documented. So if that's the case, it's documented in your service record so that when it comes time to get assistance or care at the VA, it's going to be easier to show that it's service connected to get a higher level of service through the VA.
Right. See, now that's,
right.
I think that's a very cool thing. And you said the Air Force is doing that right now. Any luck with like the Marines? Maybe it's probably hard to document things with crayon.
I didn't say
it. The Army has a hard time because they have to draw a picture of everything first, so, and then everyone knows pens are hard to use in water. So the Navy has a tough time, as does the Coast Guard. So it makes sense that the Air Force is leading the way once again. So how did you have luck or success with your program for women in recognizing or understanding, being educated on their VA options and benefits? Kind of walk us through the process of how long that takes and why change is so difficult, because I know you and I had talked before.
Yeah.
And that was a very lengthy process for you.
It was. So the reason that I knew about, this whole issue with traumatic brain injuries, because the Air Force has what they call a barrier analysis working group. So they look at specific populations within the Air Force as to, what's a barrier to service for women, and then there's a Hispanic team, a disabled team, that kind of thing. So through what we were doing for the barrier analysis for women in service, we want to make sure that we're retaining them, that kind of thing, so we get that return on investment. So what's a barrier to service? Through that, we found out that women vets had an exponentially higher trend of negative impact or negative issues, right? Higher homelessness than male vets. I want to say 6 times the rate of suicide than civilian women in general.
Right.
We're the fastest growing subpopulation of veterans. So, really it's something that we need to get ahead of before it gets too late. And, we get given a program by Congress. So we wanted to build it. Again, more from the prepare you before you go versus waiting till you get, to that veteran status and then try and figure it out. So that's why we were working on that, so that you understand your benefits and that kind of thing. And then in talking to the Center for Women Veterans, there's specifically a direct reporting unit to, headquarters VA. And they would say, it's an interesting kind of fact here, is they had a survey and they asked, are you a vet? And a lot of women would say no. But then they changed the question to say, were you ever on active duty, or did you deploy in support of a contingency operation? And they would say yes. So part of that is just getting, that population to identify as a vet.
I see.
So, and part of that is driven by society. You kind of see some of those things. So then, then potentially leads other women to say, maybe I'm not a vet. I think it's changing nowadays. Post 9/11 has helped grow that, but I think you're still seeing more of the more senior. And really the interesting piece is when the VA did a big study after separation and retirement, the population really diverges. So you have women veterans that are more successful than peers, and then women veterans that are, the ones that really show that negative trend, the suicide, homelessness, intimate partner violence, substance abuse, that kind of thing. So anyway, so we took that out, with our team on active duty and said, we need to do something about this preventive before the women depart the service. And it was really about preventing the isolation and getting them enrolled. Anybody, any vet, any male, female vet really needs to get enrolled with the VHA the day that they depart the service. And that's really the point, is to not wait until, the 2.5, 3 years after service, when you're in a time of crisis and it's hard to navigate the system. So anybody out there, if you're getting out of the service, register with the VA no matter what, immediately. That's the biggest point we found. And that's what our course, or the TAP course, was really designed to do, is to really get them comfortable with walking into the VA and asking for that, or, enrolling in the VA services, and then, going in for the regular appointments.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, it's hard. It's so hard to understand, right, why someone doesn't want to do that. It's there for you. There's no strings attached per se. You just get registered with the VA. Why? Here's a question. So why isn't that integrated into TAP?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of it is focused on employment. So and here's the interesting thing. The VA is, it's broken into services, almost like, Marines, Army, Navy, Air
Right.
Force, right?
Yep.
So you have veterans benefits that doesn't talk to veterans health, that doesn't talk to the National Cemeteries Administration. And for us as a customer, we don't always understand that. We hear VA and we hear benefits, right? Home loan
Right.
or education
Right.
or, cemeteries, right? But the most used of all of those big four is the veterans medical benefits, the VHA, Health Administration. And I think it's always been that everybody's just kind of expected that that's your next step, and you just know that. We're not as forced into it, I think, when we depart the service to do that, as much as the first thing we're going to do is buy a house. The first thing we're going to do is use that education benefit. And
yeah.
That's where the difference is.
They're definitely following Maslow's hierarchy, right? They're like, okay, well, this is what they're most worried about right now. But it just kind of seems to make sense. Like, I don't know how long that would take to integrate that into the TAP process and how much time of the TAP program that would really take up. I'm thinking of a few things during TAP that I can do without and instead get myself registered with the VA so that should my expiration term of service come up, then it enacts what I've already filled out. It's on file. Especially with the VA now holding digital records, there's no reason why that can't become a digital form that you fill out while you're in TAP. I think that would be a quick solution and a relatively cheap one to implement.
Yeah, the issue we found, though, was once when you're in the military, they own your information, right?
Yep.
I mean, your social security number is
100%.
everywhere. Yeah. But when you transfer from the DOD to the VA, it's like a Privacy Act issue, right? So we don't always release or give that release of information, which is the hardest part. I have to physically pick up my records and carry them to the VHA because it's two completely different entities. So how that information, how the medical information and that kind of thing, how that transitions from one to the other has to be on me. And that's, I think, one of the biggest cultural differences is when you're in the military, you are you're giving out, right? You're giving into the system versus at the VA, you're pulling from the system as a customer, right? You're also led more, I would think, in the military, whereas you have to be really much more self-sufficient and ask questions, and you don't know what questions to ask when you're going to the VA. But again, you're more of a customer, right? And you don't know that it's like such a big expanse in front of you if you are looking for veterans benefits versus health. So I think that's part of the, it's a lack of awareness, but I think the VA, and here's another big point, the VA now is looking at this process as recruitment to burial, basically. From the time you go into a recruitment office, there's a great journey map of the veteran, and they're looking at it as starting from the day you walk into a recruiting office until the day that you get buried in a national cemetery. Whereas on active duty, it's just in that small window of time that you're active duty. Yeah. So they don't tell you when you're a young airman that, guess what? Everybody here is a veteran in the making. There's not that perspective when you're on active duty.
Sure. So there was a giant initiative, and maybe you're aware of this because I'm sure it affected the reserve side too. But what we did was we took the medical records that were living on each individual network for each branch of the military, and we combined that onto one network that was a military health network, right? And I don't want to go into too much detail on how all that was done, obviously. For network security purposes, but it was one of those things that, okay, well, here we are combating the Privacy Act issue, and how do we share that? I would imagine that this could be something where you could have the VA be a partner member of that network, in that if you go through TAP, you fill out a waiver, a release form that says I authorize the release of my medical records. And then while you're in TAP, someone from the VA or someone from military health can actually come in, and they can kind of go over the liability and clearance or release of that information and what that means. Perhaps even a patient advocate, right? We have patient advocates at all military health facilities. So a patient advocate comes over and talks to you about your Privacy Act rights and tells you what you do and do not have to consent to when it comes to the release of your information. And, what exactly are you signing up for if you do agree to release your records to the VA by signing this form? So that would then, I would imagine, have to become part of the medical out processing
Right.
process as well, so that you fill out the form while you're in TAP. So the VA is capturing, at least the clearance form is captured prior to the medical out processing, where it could be missed, but then it could be part of the medical out processing checklist as well, just as another fail-safe or another option if TAP is not the right place. But I know we're going a little bit down a rabbit hole on this, and I just gotten like business analyst, program manager, like problem solving mode here. But
Yep. They are in the process of, and they might be very close to finishing doing some revamp of the TAP program. But you know how it
Sure.
is when you have to, and just for awareness, you're pulling together the senior steering group for this is Department of Education, Department of Labor, Department of VA, and Department of Defense. Some really senior
Right.
SCS types that are working on this, and we had to brief them and get approval, for our TAP project, and that was pretty, intensive and that kind of thing, just to do that small
Sure.
piece. So, and it's still what do they call it? It's like a elective, but it's highly encouraged right now. But to change the mandatory program, it takes some serious red tape and some serious, senior steering group power to add a form.
Well, I mean, honestly, yeah, you're at the end of the day, there's a reason why if you're in the corporate world, they call it office politics and sponsorship management. The reason it's called that is because it is the exact same thing in
Right.
Congress or whatever. That's true politicking, right? You're trying to influence change through relationship management and sponsor management, which is very cool. And I want to go down that road actually a little bit here. So we'll kind of transition into the Congress talk, right? And when
Sure.
and my best, I guess probably my best way is when you're elected to the 2nd District of
Sure.
for Minnesota. Do you plan on participating in some of those committees that are going to try to impact the veteran space with change like that, with your background and your military service?
Yes, absolutely. The veteran committee is specifically is something I definitely want to participate in, with that perspective of what I've done for specifically the women vets. I think also, and just as a kind of a little bit off topic, my son is enlisting in the Navy this summer, so
Oh wow,
I also have
that's awesome.
Yeah, so I'm very proud of him, and I have a little bit of skin in the game for the whole foreign policy and national defense as well. So
Right.
there's a little bit of a interest in that. I also think another interest that I have is somehow the budget or appropriations process. I mean, anybody out there who's listening that's a vet or a service member knows that we go through this end of year spending, then the beginning of the year continuing resolution authority every single year, and we're held hostage by the budget process.
That's right.
And it's frustrating, I think, for just about anybody out there. You buy pallets of paper and toner cartridges, stacks of them, in September.
That's
and
right.
then, you can't do anything in October because we've had drill weekends canceled because we don't have money.
Yep.
Which impacts unit effectiveness. So
Sure.
anyways, I think that somehow there's something that really needs to be fixed there. I mean, if I had the power, I think we should look at like a 2-year budget cycle instead of an annual budget cycle.
That'd be
By
something,
Congress,
wouldn't it?
right?
Yeah, that would
Yeah,
be
like-
something.
A Congress class gets elected, you have one budget for that 2-year period. And I think that would at least cut in half the number of times that we're held hostage by the process. Then you just think about the number of, hello?
Yeah, I'm here. I was just going to say, and I'm sorry for interrupting.
No.
I'm conservative in nature, so I'm not afraid to tell the audience that, and I'm always up for a discussion. I'm not the kind of person that's going to be like, oh, you got to listen to what I say, I'm right. Always open to hearing new opinions, but it just seems to me that one of the main differences is we have to kind of show restraint in not just fiscally, but I think where that comes in play, the Department of Defense or any major department of the federal government, is I think that we need to show restraint in the desire to create programs to fix other programs, right? Instead of I'm going to create this new program. Why not reform or revamp a current or existing program that has a budget, that has that budget allocated for the next 6 months to 12 months? Why not fix that one up and maybe clean up some of the mess that's been going on there through an auditory process, rather than creating a new program that then, once established and on its feet, will replace the old program. So at any given time, you're running two congruent programs. It just doesn't make sense to me to do it that way, where you have audit processes where you can have an outside agency come in and say, okay, well, I've done an analysis of this program, and this is where it's ineffective, and this is where it's wasting money. And if you do X, Y, and Z, you can actually curb some of the spending and make the program more effective. Is that something that you think needs to happen more within, all government levels, or are you more of the let's create a program to get rid of a different program?
So I am from the school of thought that the 10th Amendment says that national defense and foreign policy is really the primary responsibility of the federal government. And I know that there's other things that do come with that. The 16th Amendment is about taxes, so that gives that, fiscal federalism, that authority or power to kind of influence the states. But I think the way I've been thinking about it myself is that, the trend for food is farm to table, right? I think that politics needs to get a little bit more farm to table. It's fresher. It's more connected to the grassroots. It's more, you have more authority over, some of the local programs. And I think you're going to have better solutions. And I don't know, I just like that analogy because I think it's something that shows why you want to have a little bit more local control or local, and I think it breeds innovation more than, like a one big national policy that includes, those of us that have been in the military, and I've lived in 6 different states. Texas is not Massachusetts, right?
Yep.
Something that that you want to, like a law that you think is going to apply is not going to necessarily fit. We've lived in, Washington State. It's not the same as New Mexico. And I think that with the visibility of that, you understand that there's a lot of things and solutions that are going to come out of New Mexico that are very different than Wisconsin. And it's going to be right for that local area, but it's not necessarily going to be right for everybody. And just think, if we had a big, huge law that came down for all 50 states, 340 million people or whatever, the latest population. But if you're in that thought process, you are not going to try and come up with a better idea. You're not going to come up with a better solution for something because you're just accepting the rules that come down from the federal government.
Oh, I love what you're saying, because essentially, in the way I think of it, and you can correct me if you're seeing it differently, but the way I'm thinking of it is you're almost creating more of a free market when it comes to policy, right? It's very much like a capitalist approach to policy, where you're creating competing ideas and letting the best one win for the area where that best idea was created. And I love the diversity in policy thought process, right? What you're saying is not in Texas, you're not going to need necessarily the same policy or regulation that you're going to need in, I think it's Massachusetts, right? It's not going to be the same. So when it comes to matters of health and safety, that kind of stuff, obviously you're going to want more of a federal impact and federal control over. But when it comes to infrastructure spending, I can tell you now, the state of New Jersey, where I live, has terrible roads. They're all chewed up because we have so many motorists on these roads. Some of the infrastructure spending that's going to the Department of Defense to spend on whatever it's, or not Department of Defense, the federal government to spend on whatever they're spending that on. I won't say because I don't know off the top of my head. 100%, but I can tell you that it's probably not on fixing roads in New Jersey. Why not let some of that money go towards, let the state handle that, or even better, the local governments handle that. I don't really see a lot of power in local government, and that's based on many places that I've lived in my career, and that's a shame. I think that is a missing piece of the equation for this country right now. You don't have this sort of, everyone says like, okay, well, change has to be grassroots, but how do you start grassroots? If there are no grassroots, you don't have power in local government at the moment. So how do you start change at the grassroots when everything is federal or state level?
Sure. So I would tell you too, so the Minnesota 2nd Congressional District has, sub-organizations in it, right? There's like 11 sub-organizations, so think of a squadron,
Sure.
but you've got flights, right? Different flights based on like a geographic area. You have different, maybe different smaller counties. So even within them, I will connect with, either talk face to face with like the 500 cups of coffee I've had the last 3 months, or, phone calls and talking to these people. I mean, it's been a gift to be able to do that.
That's
and
awesome.
I've really loved that. But you find out that even within that small area, one pocket has a lot of concern about parental rights when it comes to medicine or vaccination. And then another pocket has a lot of concern about agriculture, and then another pocket, this little, specific geographic area has concern about small business. So even with a small congressional district, you have this just diversity of priority when it comes to politics or when it comes to, business, economy, trade, that kind of thing. So it's kind of interesting, just such a small sphere, but just the diversity in politics at that level shows why we should not have such a huge political process, at the federal or national level.
Yeah, I think that's I think it's amazing to think about, and I'm really still kind of stuck on, if you're in the 2nd District of Minnesota and you're not voting for Erika, I will come find you. Okay, we're gonna have a conversation, and we'll have it may not be a cup of coffee, it might be a glass of whiskey or tequila, and we'll get real. Okay, because what you're saying, Erika, is I think very much an answer to what people are saying they want, but maybe don't know how to articulate. They want to see change, but they want to see change where it's going to affect them, right? That's what everyone screams about,
right?
Is what they care about, what impacts them the most. And they want that at the highest level, when there's a whole country of 350 million or 380 million people out there who all want different things. You want to take the polarization out of politics, then you need to get more granular and more local and figure out how it's going to impact your world specifically.
Right. Then you're creating that change. Instead, if you're doing change at the national level, it's going to be given to you. It's not going to be something that you are producing. It's not something that you are attached to.
That sounds terrible. That sounds
terrible.
No. I'm 100% on board with you. I was just thinking like it's going to be given to you by the federal government. Like, I'm very much for less federal government, less programs. The people govern themselves more. That's more my political stance. I don't think that I should give money to the federal government at such a high rate only for them to mismanage that money and not use it effectively towards programs that are really making the most impact. So what you're saying really rings true with what I believe. And I'm thinking, like, in my head, how much did I pay in local taxes versus federal taxes in this past, I don't know, my entire professional career, which is 17 years now? How much have I paid in in local taxes? I could probably, probably a month's, maybe 2 months worth of federal taxes just in the last year is more than what I've paid in local taxes ever. So I think that's a problem. I think it's a big problem.
it comes back to us, but it comes off like every step that, you pay the taxes to the Treasury, and the Treasury gives it to Congress, and the Congress gives it to a department, and the department gives it to a state. And every time it flows through one of those steps, it loses pennies off each dollar, right?
It's like in Office Space when Milton wants a piece of cake. I don't know if you've seen Office Space, but I'll make the reference just because I'm sure there's listeners out there, lots of listeners that have. They're passing birthday cake around, and there's Milton. He's kind of he's the office shy guy. No one really listens to him or takes him seriously. And they're passing cake around, and he gets the first piece of cake because he's the first guy in line. And he goes to take a bite of it, and people go, "No, Milton, that's rude. Share with everyone. Pass it down, and you'll, eventually a plate will come to you." And then he hands off a plate, and it happens to be the last plate of cake, and then everyone's there eating their cake, and Milton's left with none. That's what comes to mind when you're talking about. Sure. Everyone skims it off. If you can't see it or visualize it, you need to go and find the clip on YouTube. But it's very much like that. You're right. It's okay. It's going to trickle down, and it'll eventually get to local level, but not before a bunch of other hands put their hand in the cookie jar. So, what role do you think being a leader, and I'm taking a leap here to another topic, but also on the same lines of politics. So, what a leader in the military going into a leader of your district? Why is that it's so important?
Sure. I think my success that I've had with the people that I've really, feel that I've had really good leadership experiences with through the military has always been more about, number one, listening, and then number two, leading to the best answer for them, not an answer that I give. Right.
Sure.
So I think similarly, in my opinion, the role of a representative needs to be more of a voice and needs to be more of a, like owning the message, not me having every single answer, but being able to let the district produce an answer that's right for them. And I think in general, I think politics has gone to the point where, it's a situation of, well, here's what happened this last week. This is how I voted. And the message is pushed down. Versus, all right, everybody, this is what's happening in the next month. These are the votes coming up. What do we think? What do we,
Yeah.
Should we go this way or that way? That kind of thing. I think it needs to be more of a, again, a voice of everybody. And then that leads to, I guess that corollary with leadership is, I'm not going to have every answer for the 5 million things that are happening. Why not use the district interest of the people in the district to, create a team on healthcare? What are some of the things that we'd like to do in healthcare, guys? And, put together some, little, team with a doctor, a patient, an insurance person, a lawyer, and hey, let's come up with an innovative solution that works for us. Maybe it's going to work for others, but I think things have to be generated at that grassroots level, going back to that same message. And then me listening, or whoever the, representative is listening and empowering the people in the district to make some of the decisions or make some of the creative solutions, because I'm one person, any representative is one person, and you can't come up with every single answer that's going to be, the best optimal, effective answer for the 350 million people. So
yeah, let the people govern themselves. At least come up with the best ideas, at least come up with the ideas. And
if you're sitting across the table from each and if that team is sitting across the table from each other, you're also going to better understand, maybe this is why the doctor says this, and this is why, the lawyer says this, and you have to talk to each other. And that's also going to be just a learning and information experience between, those people to come up with maybe a better weighted kind of response or solution.
I love the idea of it. I love, obviously it's not a novel idea. It's something that has been around, but we've somewhat lost our way in the way that we govern this country. When you talk to other people that are in the same boat as you, folks that are running for congressional districts in their own states or the same state, Are they somewhat on board with what you're saying, or do they align with you?
Um, so we have, and this is something that I think every state has, you're going to have your state political platform, right? So you have a platform like there's the federal, GOP or Democratic platform for the national party, but then each state also has one. At least Minnesota does, and I would imagine
Sure.
others do. So everybody pretty much that I have, spoken with and come into contact with is pretty much in agreement that, they support the platform. There's a little bit of, deviances here and there from that message, but in general, everybody does now. I mean, I think I kind of have more of maybe a rogue kind of tendency to do something, a little bit more different when it comes to let's do a 2-year budget, stuff like that. But I just think the more you put some of those creative solutions like that out there, even if it doesn't become the solution, it's a influence to other ways of thinking. No matter if my idea doesn't happen, at least it's going to create, have creative juices for people to go, hey, well, if we don't do it that way, maybe we can do it this way. And I think that that's also part of the message is to let's just think about doing things differently. And we've seen that on both sides of the spectrum. We've had some really non-traditional, politicians,
Sure.
Upsetting the apple cart a little bit of, different from the norm. And that's, to be honest, one of the reasons I've never, up until about October, I never even thought I was going to never occurred to me to do this. I started talking to people around just last Thanksgiving, and it's because of examples set at the national level of both parties that, maybe, the non-traditional candidate is a better answer than someone who's been doing this for 20, 30 years.
I agree with you. I think we need fresh ideas, and I think we need them at what you're talking about, the district level, right? At the grassroots level where we can make change. How many people are in the second district?
Districts are broken out into about 750,000 people.
Okay.
Something like that.
So the second district, for the listeners that aren't hip on Minnesota district lines, is just south of Minneapolis to St. Paul, correct?
It is, yep. So it's a lot of Scott County, Dakota County, Goodhue County, Wabasha, and some at Bryce County in between. So it's a pretty big size district. The Minneapolis districts are going to be smaller because of just the amount of people that are in a small geographic area. Yeah, it's just south of St. Paul for the most part, and Minneapolis. So
I would imagine when you have such a you have a larger actual square mileage district than the city districts. Do you see a lot of difference in the constituents inside that district and what they think is important to them, or does it seem to pretty much align tightly?
No, it's a pretty diverse district. It really is when it comes to economics, when it comes to, geography, a lot of agriculture in the south, small business in the north, and then different points on the platform that are the most important. One of the things I've been looking at when I go, call the different, the sub districts part is to find out what's your number one priority. And again, they range from, larger farms that are coming in to, the anti-vaccination to, legalizing marijuana to some of the infrastructure, right? So roads and bridges, getting out of, the suburb into the downtown Minneapolis area because of commuting, So I think that it's a big enough area that there are really differences of opinion. But I love it. I mean, we come from the military, which is the most diverse organization in the United States, pretty much, right?
Kidding.
We draw from everywhere. Yeah.
I love that. I talk to I talk a lot about, look, as military members, men and women who have served this country, it's very important for us to transition and not necessarily just into the traditional workforce, but we should be going out and being leaders in our communities. And that could be a leader, at your church. That could be a leader of the youth sports or the PTA or PTA. I don't remember.
PTA.
I don't have PTA. I was right the first time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you know what I mean. And local government is just as much a part of that. Just because you're not necessarily, maybe you're not running for Senate or Congress, a House, a district position, or you're not running for state Senate for that matter, but you just participating in your local government and being a voice that comes from a diverse background. You come from a place where you've worked with people from all over the world. You've been all around the world. You've had this lifetime of experiences balled up into, 4, 8, 12, 20 years. Bring that to the table, bring that back into your communities, and speak not with any anger or contentment, but speak with just understanding. Come from a place of, well, I've seen this and I know that this works, or I thought that too, but then I recognized when I was here, and share those experiences and give people through that lens that you bring a kind of a view into how to be more diverse in your thinking. Because again, we tend to get very narrow-minded and self-serving when it comes to politics, and really just trying to go after what it is that will serve us best, and rather than serving the community best. I think that's a very important point. And if you're going to emphasize sub districts and more localized government, and that you're going to have that conversation and filter ideas up, I think that you're on the right track. And that's something that it's actually in contrast to how the military can work sometimes. You have the diverse school of thought, but we're very much top down directed in the military. But what you're asking for is something that is bottom up. Which I think is very cool.
But I think we're also used to bringing in people that come in from everywhere else, and they work in one shop, and they have completely different ideas and perspectives based on where they come from. So I think we're good at making that fit to whatever that situation is. When you go to a new duty station and you're working with somebody who's been to, 5 different people that came from 5 different other duty stations, and you have to work together. I think that there's something to that. And I would also say, coming from, I did a couple of years in a corporate role. And you can tell, I think back to one of the things we were saying earlier is what the veteran perspective brings, someone who's been in the military, you understand how to act in an organization, which is something that not everybody learns. And I think that that's a big point, that it's hard to, you really can emphasize too, is that you know how to treat other people with respect, and some of the things that you shouldn't say, or, you shouldn't get in a fight in the parking lot, and, those kinds of things, because you know how to behave in a large organization. Those they call it table rules or table manners or something like, kitchen table rules. Yeah.
That's, and that's exactly why we need to be out and be leaders in our communities, because, even as I've demonstrated to, or with the people that I work with in my day job, I've seen people just really get bent out of shape about things that don't need to be something that you get bent out of shape about. And that's not to discount someone's feelings or emotions, to say that, they're wrong or not just, but it is what you're saying is there's a manner that you should address things with that continue the conversation rather than kill it. That's very much missing in politics today. As we
I would
all
agree.
know.
Yeah.
That's missing in politics. We have two sides that aren't hearing each other, and really it shouldn't be two sides. It should just be like you're saying. It should be districts. It should be local, and feed those ideas up. I can't agree more with that. I think that as military men and women, we are primed to be the people that kind of usher in that way of thinking, because again, we have a way of respecting others. We have a way of understanding each other's differences, because you have to, because you come together and get the mission done. And there is no other way. It doesn't happen if you don't do that. People get hurt if you don't do that. So I really appreciate you taking that approach. I think that there's a lot of benefit there for your district, and I hope, for my sake, to kind of practice what I preach, I hope to take that to my own district and talk to, the people on my side of the the country. I know I want to. Right. I'm not just blowing smoke. I'm really ready to.
Well, I want to hear about it when you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I'll just take a run at them when it's time. Who knows? Because we have to. Something's got to change. It can't be the same people doing this stuff. They
right.
suck at it. They suck at it. So, sorry. Let me get unprofessional while I'm talking about being professional. But seriously, I think the country is screaming for change. They maybe don't know how to go about it, and obviously the top dog's always going to get the bulk of the hate mail, right? But the real way to go about this is grassroots, and what grassroots means is make an impact at your local level. And if enough of us do that, enough local levels, that's going to make noise all the way up the chain. So
and share the success stories of when we do it.
Yeah,
we have to make those success stories more obvious so that it's the proof of why we need to do it.
Yeah, 100%. And I love that. So very anxious, very excited to see how things turn out. I am rooting for you. I have all the faith that you can do this. I know it's a hotly contested district. Has anything changed since I last checked, since we last spoke?
Not at the moment. We're on a little bit of a pause for larger gatherings. So
yep. That's right.
We're just delaying a little bit of the process, because each then little Senate district, it's the sub part of the Congressional District. It is a state Senate district, and each of them have to have a convention to, endorse their local legislators. So those have been all delayed until some of this, the coronavirus hot is dispersed a little bit. So
sure. Cool. So obviously, for the listeners out there, Ms. Erika Cashin, she is running for Minnesota's 2nd District. You can find her information. Obviously, she's active on Twitter. She's on LinkedIn. I will have this episode on the website, vetpivot.com, next week. So look for that coming to your ear holes. And then we will go, and if you're in Minnesota, you're going to vote. And if you're not in Minnesota, you're going to go find 3 people that you know in Minnesota, and you're going to tell them.
And vote where you live too.
Yeah, vote. Obviously, vote where you live. And veterans, if you're not voting, shame on you. Men and women died, so we can preserve that right. So, thank you, Erika. Thank you so much for being on the show. Any parting shots for the listeners out there?
No, I would thank you for doing this. I think it is a great means of getting people together and having just these kitchen table conversations. And this is the way things happen. This is the way the word gets out. It's, just act, use your network, look at concentric circles of everybody that you know and tell everybody that they know to either, if it's vote or just be active or stand up for whatever you believe in. And the one interesting thing I heard was someone said they were just a consumer of politics. Don't be a consumer of it, right? Don't just consume it, do something with it. Yeah,
that's the forefathers rolling over in their graves as they hear that, right? You're not a consumer of politics. That is not why we fought the British, so we could just be consumers of politics and kind of have this masked monarchy. No, don't do that. Listeners, you have been treated. You are welcome, and you are dismissed. Thank you.
Pivot. If you're getting out the military, need some info is where you can get it. Pivot. It's the podcast that you need if you gotta stay driven.
Listen, if you haven't to map, there's no need for the panic attack, but you gotta step away from the camera with cap, peek a light in the load that you have on your back. Listen, if you haven't to map, there's no need for the panic attack, but you gotta step away from the camera with cap, peek a light in the load that you have on your back.
As a matter of fact, what's a plan that you have? You can sit in the back. You can map your path out of this world with the pod that you cast. BETPIVOT reboot. All of my broskies we knew. Holding a cold piece. Warlock with a six. Fill it out slowly. All of my homies. Hope you listen up closely. Host be putting in noti. Giving info and posting. Pertinent postings for the veteran show is excellent. So you exhibit when you exiting. And you exiting on your transition. And you position for your best vision. This is Vet Pivot.